So my 9 year ago self, I think that I would, for one thing, kind of just acknowledge that like that's okay, like that this like you can do things even while doubting yourself. It's kind of like that whole thing, like brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Brave means that you feel the fear and you do the thing anyway, right? So for me, the self doubt has just been, I just have learned to bring it along with me and say, there it is. Okay, I see it now. There it is. And I'm going to just do the thing anyway. I also, I struggle a fair amount with like just a people pleasing kind of personality. And so it is true that usually at Ronald McDonald House, I mean, everybody loves what we're doing up in here. I love what we're doing up in here. The staff, I mean, it's really pretty great. There are also sometimes when like I have to make a decision that is either A or B. And some people prefer A and some people prefer B. And there is no C, right? And so not everybody may love just whatever decision has been made. And that is always hard for me because I am generally happiest, as a general rule, when the people around me are happy. Like it's taken lots of therapy to unwind that. And I'm just like, okay, right. I am generally happiest when the people around me are happy. And it's also, I can't ensure that everyone around me is happy all the time. And so that can also be okay.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Today's going to be an incredibly important conversation because we're talking to an amazing leader. Today's guest is Tami Greenberg. Now, she holds a master's degree in both social work and business. She is the 9-year CEO of the Ronald McDonald House Charities of Kansas City. Tami, welcome to the show.
Well, hi, Keenan. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Tami, in our previous conversation together, you said something that I thought was really incredible. You said, have you ever heard of the phrase, get out of Dodge?
I did.
What does that mean to you?
Well, some of your like listeners and viewers will be like, I don't know that phrase, but I think you maybe have to be old to know that phrase. But there is this expression, get out of Dodge. Sometimes it's like get the H out of Dodge. It's kind of based on Dodge City, Kansas, which is where I am from. I am a Dodge City kid. So Dodge City, Kansas is in southwest Kansas. Some might say the middle of nowhere, but it's not the middle of nowhere, right? Because it's where I'm from. And it kind of comes from like the old Western days. I like to say that I did that. I got out of Dodge. It is also true that I'm very proud of my Dodge City roots. So our high school mascot was the Red Demons, if you can believe that. Still is, the Dodge City Red Demons. So yeah, that was me, Keenan. I got out of Dodge.
How do you feel like growing up in Dodge impacted your worldview?
So one of the things, and I don't remember if we talked about this before in our kind of pre-conversation or not, one of the things that really was impactful for me is that my dad was and is a doctor. And in Dodge City, the medical community there is primarily made up of, or at least when I was growing up, I'm old now, I'm 51. When I was growing up, the medical community was almost entirely physicians from other countries. Because if you had gotten a medical degree from somewhere in the United States and you could pick where you could go in the United States, you might not have picked Dodge City. But if you were from another country, we might say anywhere in America is good. And so a lot of those physicians were from other countries. So our closest family friends were from other countries. Like my second mom, my second dad, were Bolivian and are Bolivian. Like, so hablo español. I speak a little bit of Spanish because of this Bolivian family. And so our closest family friends were from Thailand and Saudi Arabia and Chile and Bolivia and Germany. So here I was in a super small town, Dodge City, Kansas. The primary industry there is beef, the steak. So when you eat your Dodge City steaks, and I also was really just lucky and privileged to have a global perspective, even in a small town. So I'm a lucky kid to have grown up with all those good folks around me.
You know, one of the things that I've appreciated when I was younger, I didn't enjoy it so much, but now that I have a little perspective in age, right? I moved around a lot. I was born in Seattle, grew up in Detroit, spent time in South Carolina for college, then out to Vegas, then Hawaii, now Vegas, now back out to Hawaii pretty soon. The one thing that I recognized in moving around a lot is I saw so many different perspectives, so many different cultures, and it helped me kind of round out my worldview of what it's like to be a human, but also see the person across from me, not their affiliation, not their religion, not their political party. Do you think that that kind of shaped your worldview of how you see humans because you had so much exposure at a young age to so many different types of people?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. I knew when I was a junior in high school that I wanted to be a social worker. So there I was, the doctor's daughter in Dodge City, Kansas, telling my junior year economics teacher that I wanted to be a social worker. And he said, I'll never forget it. He said, they will eat you alive. The people who need social work services, they will eat you alive. And so I was not necessarily encouraged to pursue a career in social work. And I knew early on that I am just, I guess, lucky, I don't know, to be able to sense this kind of shared humanity that, like, regardless of political affiliation, which is a particularly important time to be talking about that, right? Like, we're all humans here. That's one of the things I love about my job at Ronald McDonald House, is that everybody loves their kids, right? And so there's just this element of shared humanity that I think that if you're willing to look for it, and if you're willing to be open to it, it's right there. You can live in a big town or a small town, and you can live in a lot of places like you did, or one place. If you are willing to, I think, if we are really willing to recognize that we all have a lot more in common than we don't, then we're just going to, I don't know, get along better, understand ourselves better, understand each other better. It's a good place to start, I think.
I mean, the antidote, right, to ignorance is understanding. There's a famous saying, it says, if you truly understood and knew your enemy, they would not be your enemy.
Ha! That's brilliant. Yes, seek first to understand, right? Yeah, and I think that, yeah, I mean, who of us should have enemies, really, right? And so for me, that, like, perspective of, again, growing up in Dodge City and having a global kind of mindset, even in a small town, I think that, and this was before the days of social media. You know, I know that you and I are going to talk about, like, the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. We felt sort of isolated in Dodge City. I'll say that I did, in the sense of, like, I went to college in the Chicago area, a super conservative evangelical Christian college. And I became aware of all the things that I had no idea existed when I was growing up in Dodge City. One of my examples of that is the Gap. Like, you know, the Gap, everybody buys their jeans at the Gap. I got to college and I was like, what's the Gap? Because we didn't have one in Dodge City. So, you know, so we were isolated in a way, but we also, like, you know, it had a sense of community growing up with each other. And so I think you can create community wherever you are. You can create it, you can find it, and you can be the source of it for someone else.
I want to double tap on you as a young girl, right? Say, I want to be a social worker. Someone says they're going to eat you alive out there. In that moment, we have two opportunities. One is we can either say, I'm going to prove somebody wrong, or the other one is say, you obviously know more than I do, so I'm not going to give up on this dream. What was the natural reaction if we could time travel back to young Tami hearing that for the first time? What were kind of the thoughts that went through your head?
Gosh, young Tami would have no idea of all the things that awaited actual Tami, right? Young Tami was really informed by, led by, inspired by the concept of, like, mission work. So, like, I grew up in a Christian environment. Like I said, went to a Christian college. And so for me, the concept of service and that we are all children of God. And as I have grown older, for me, that has, the definition of what that means really has grown. So for me, social work, at least it started and it really has continued to be sort of a ministry, kind of small M ministry, in the sense of, like, let's take care of each other. So I was lucky in that I kind of went to that space when, I remember his name, but I won't say it on the podcast, but when that high school teacher said they'll eat you alive, I kind of went the route of, I'm going to prove him wrong. And I'm going to show that I can, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to at least try this because it's what I feel called to do. I'm also just super aware that there are so many folks in life who don't have, any kind of other messages, folks who are telling them they can do what they want to do or what they feel called to do. So I think that I'm grateful that young Tami didn't listen to the naysayers. I also think that it was and as you know, Keenan, I have a wife, right? So it's like, I know I've talked about God a lot so far in ministry. I also am a gay person. And so kind of reconciling those things, and then we think about, like, kind of the whole of our humanity. I mean, there was some reckoning kind of in my journey along the way. And I think that we have to, like, be in touch with who we are ourselves, right? And so for me, kind of growing up small town Dodge City, this, like, fairly conservative religious environment, and continuing that kind of environment in college, and kind of becoming all of who I am and figuring out a way to move forward really authentically, honoring all of it. It's a lifelong journey. I'll say that I'll be 52 soon and I still haven't mastered it. I still haven't figured it all out, but I'm in the process of learning. Conversations like this with you kind of, help me to keep learning from you and from, the world.
One of my favorite sayings right now is, often when we live our truth, it shows other people the lie that they've been living. That
Hmm.
authenticity and knowing who we truly are is something that so many people struggle with, especially in this world of comparison and ideas being put into our lives. And I'm glad that you were able to find who you truly were and leaned into it so early.
Yeah, well, in the process of, right, we're all evolving. I was actually telling someone this morning in the context of a kind of business conversation, saying that transparent is kind of the only way that I know how to be. Like I find it easier. I find it easier to be authentic, to be genuine, to be transparent. And I attribute that to some of my early days in terms of like coming out and kind of figuring out in an environment and in a kind of societal time that was much different related to LGBTQ issues than it is now. It's just easier to, I think, in the end, to be who you are. It's to when you are in a game playing kind of place, whether it's you're like Instagramming, right, or you're being one kind of way with one group of friends and a different kind of way with a different group of friends, it's exhausting. Like it's exhausting. And I think that for me, I have found it easiest, quite frankly, the path of least resistance is just to be all of who I am all the time. Perhaps to the chagrin of people around me. I don't know. Because I can be kind of silly, and I can be kind of silly even in serious environments. And I can be kind of serious and silly environments, right? Like I'm kind of, we all are our own whole package, right? And so for me, I have found it easier just to be that. And again, evolving, right? Kind of growing and changing and learning as I go.
So let's talk a little bit about your process of evolution. So we go away to college, right? And now today we sit here, we're the CEO with a 9-year tenure at the Ronald McDonald House. What happened in between going to college and then starting as a CEO? What was that journey like?
You mentioned that I think you mentioned that I have a master's degree in social work and in business. So my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and then I really have started and maintained my whole career in nonprofit. My earliest jobs were in child abuse and neglect, like child welfare. And that is
Mhm.
tough work. So kudos, shout out to all the ones out there who are keeping kids safe, like in the moment, in those environments. Because that's trench work in the sense of like literally keeping kids safe from like abusive and neglectful environments. So I started there, spent a number of years in the HIV and AIDS arena, which I attribute that. I really am so grateful for that time. It was late 90s and early 2000s when I worked in the HIV and AIDS arena. And it's when life with HIV and AIDS was really changing for people related to new medicines that were becoming available. And quite frankly, people expected to die and then didn't. That
Yeah.
changes your worldview, right? If you think you have something terminal versus if you have something that is manageable. And so I was really lucky not only to really be inspired by the courage of folks living with HIV and folks working with folks who have HIV. It was also a super supportive environment. That is where my wife, and I know I say wife now, we weren't wives then, right? Because it was a different world. We were partners. But that's where my partner and I were like, we're going to start a family. Like, we're going to have kids. And if it was in this kind of bubble, I realize now, really supportive and safe LGBTQ kind of environments in those kind of early 2000s in the HIV and AIDS arena. So I kind of transitioned from that to working with the National MS Society for a long time, and then with other nonprofits. And like, as you know, I've been here at the CEO at Ronald McDonald House for 9 years. One of the things that is really where it all feels like it kind of comes together for me is that in my leadership role now, so like I started obviously in social work roles and then got increasing or kind of assumed increasing levels of responsibility. Sometimes people will say, how do I become a CEO? And one thing I'll sometimes say is be careful. Like it's maybe not as easy as some of us make it look. I don't know. But one of the ways to become a CEO and to kind of journey through that in your career is to say yes to stuff. Like say yes to more opportunities, say yes to more responsibilities. There's something that you feels a little bit daunting or overwhelming or a little bit outside your scope and your lane, get permission to tackle it. Like try new things and do the hard thing and say yes. That for me is where just opportunities have continued to come along. When I've said, hey, I don't know that I know very much about doing this thing, but can I watch you do the thing? And then can I try doing the thing? And then I get better at the thing. And so that has led to me to this, what is really a pretty extraordinary organization and role. I'm a lucky kid. Yeah. To have had the opportunities I've got.
The tenacity to take on more than what you're assigned is something that I feel like has gotten a really negative I would say, view in the world of social media? Because people often say, especially during the pandemic, I'm not going to do more than what I'm being paid to do. But how are you supposed to get more responsibility on the other side of what you're being paid to do unless you live in that stretch and taking on more responsibility?
Totally. I think it's a unique challenge for everyone and Gen Z, as we would say in this workforce, folks. And I am the mom of a Gen Z new worker, and my other son is in college still. I think it is hard because if you've got your lane, right, do the thing and only do the thing. And then I think that for folks who are like, but I want to contribute at a higher level, I want to add more value, finding ways to do that quite frankly aren't like annoying to your boss, because you also don't want to be the one who like is into all the things that you're not supposed to be into, right? There's a balance related to that, because it can't be like, oh my God, the new kid is like rearranging the shelves and the shelves didn't need to be rearranged. So I think there's an art to that taking on of more responsibility. And I think a lot of it is about communication. I think it's an understanding one's own self. So kind of self-awareness. Why is it that I am seeking more responsibility, a bigger title, better pay, a different role? Like what's happening in my own self that I'm seeking that? And then communicating with others about that, and in kind of career work, we talk a lot about mentors, right? So it's important to have a mentor. It's important to have a sponsor, and kind of the difference between, as I understand it, the difference between mentors and sponsors. A sponsor may be kind of the person who gives you the opportunity. Like, hey, I'm going to ask you to throw me a line, so to speak. Give me a chance to sink or swim on something, and a mentor is one who might kind of just help you along the way, developing skills. But you got to ask for it. You got to be a good communicator. I think you also have to acknowledge when you're falling short in something. We've all made mistakes. We're all going to fall on our face. It's one of the questions I actually always ask in job interviews. I always say, tell me about a time that you just like seriously, totally like messed up. And I don't mean like something cute, like I cared too much. I don't want that kind of a mess up. Like, oh, this one time I worked too hard. I don't mean that. Like, tell me about, you tried something and it just totally sucked. And so tell me about that, because that's part of the journey too.
Absolutely. Our willingness to, I think the only time that we truly, or my personal experience, the times when I learn the most is when I fail. Right? Being able to go into that moment and say, what can I do better? Because it stings at that moment is super important to be able to learn from, which is really powerful. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the impact in the work that you guys do in the community. So if people are tuning in today and they say, I've heard of Ronald McDonald House, but I don't know exactly what they do, why don't you give us a little high level pitch on the impact that you guys have in the community?
I love that. Thank you for the opportunity. Here's what I would say to your listeners and viewers. There probably is a Ronald McDonald House near you, because there is a Ronald McDonald House near virtually every children's hospital. That's what we do, is we take care of families while their kids are sick. Sometimes people have a sense, kind of like you said, I have a sense that Ronald McDonald House does good things. They take care of, but is it this situation or that situation? So to be clear, we are talking about families who have kids who are sick. Sometimes ill, sometimes injured. Sometimes it's a car accident situation and the helicopter has flown the family in from the car accident and you've got kiddos in the ICU. Sometimes we're talking about toddlers who've been diagnosed with cancer. We're talking about grade schoolers who need a kidney transplant or a heart transplant. Can you imagine a heart transplant? Wow. Sometimes for me, it feels like science fiction and it's actually happening. A family comes in and they say, we're waiting for a heart. And then they get one. Their child has a heart transplant, and then they go home with a healthy child with someone else's beating heart in their chest. It's like science fiction, except that it's real. It's like magic, but it's real. Sometimes it's families who have little teeny babies. When I first started here, I remember meeting a dad at the coffee pot, and I always say that we don't have like a staff coffee pot and a family coffee pot. Like we just have a coffee pot. I meet a lot of families. I drink a lot of coffee, and I meet a lot of families at the coffee pot. And I met this dad when I first started, and he made this motion, and he said, "My baby is 1 pound." And he went like this, like not like this, like you might do with a baby. Like he cupped his hand, like his baby is 1 pound. And so I just think the tenderness, the sacredness, the joy and the grief, like the enormity of what happens at a Ronald McDonald House, I think almost can't be overstated. People will sometimes say, how do you work there and not cry? It must be a sad place. And it's sometimes a sad place, and we sometimes cry. It also is often a joyful and miraculous place, because families are, so if you can see like this little thing behind me, it says RMHC. I don't know if you can see what it says, keeping families close. That's kind of our deal. It is our deal. We keep families close to each other, close to medical care, we keep kids close to their parents when they're sick. When it comes down to it, like all of our listeners today know that the scariest times when something really terrible happens, you call your family or the friends that you think of like family, right? So sometimes it's not your actual family, sometimes it's the people, your chosen family, but it's family that you call. And when your family is sick, or when the people you love the most in the world are sick, that's when the bottom drops out. And so those are the families that we're taking care of at Ronald McDonald House. All the Ronald McDonald Houses run kind of like franchise organizations. So we are separate individual organizations. We here in Kansas City have 94 bedrooms. We have 5 Ronald McDonald houses, and we have 94 bedrooms, and we're full every night. So at this exact moment, there are 94 families. I'm thinking of families who are in that house and in this house in which I sit, who have children who are, God, I met a dad this morning, literally this morning, Keenan. I was over there in the kitchen. I said to a dad, I said, how long have you been with us? He said, we came October 1st. So he's been here for a while. And I said, how's it going? And he kind of went, he said, we're battling. I don't even know what that dad was battling. I don't know what his child has, but he had kind of a worn down look to him. He said, we're battling. So we've got 94 families who are battling childhood illness every day at Ronald McDonald House, and that's who we're taking care of.
I think about some of the biggest challenges that we face in society today. I mentioned in our previous conversation, I talk about this on the podcast often. 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast since the 60s where he talked about the dangers of cigarette smoke and said the biggest threat to our society today is not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Not only are you providing a sense of a safe place for people, but you're also forming a sense of community, which seems like it truly is the antidote to help people navigate some of these really, really tough times, to know that people are going through like situations and then people are here to listen and just be there in their times of turbulence.
It's true. I think that loneliness is something that we, American society, are just now getting better at talking about. I think, let's name it. Like we all experienced some degree of it during COVID. And now I think we're getting better at naming it and recognizing it and seeing when it happens, and it's happening all around us and it's happening to us. And I thought it was really, prescient. That's a real fancy pants word, but smart. I thought it was real smart of the Surgeon General to make that kind of declaration that this is in fact an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. And I think that particularly for young people who don't realize that's what they're feeling when they're like this, right, scrolling, and they're actually, what you're feeling right now, it feels like maybe jealousy or comparison. It's also loneliness and isolation. For families at Ronald McDonald House, we are actively combating that, because if you think about whenever you've had a crisis in your own life, like we've all had crises in our life, and it's, I think about sometimes you're driving in a car, right? And you're like, how can other people just be driving in their cars like normal people when the bottom has dropped out of my life, right? Like whether it's grief or just an acute crisis or whatever. For families at Ronald McDonald House, it's like, how can other kids be out trick-or-treating, or how can other kids just be whatevering when my child is fighting for their life? Like, it's just a super isolating experience to have a really sick child. And then when Ronald McDonald House is there and families are staying together and they're eating together, like all of our bedrooms are like hotel style bedrooms. So it's like you have your private bedroom and it's nice, and it's a nice bathroom. So it's private. So it's like staying in a hotel, but instead of a hotel, you're having group dinners. Like volunteers come in and make dinners, and you're having your breakfast burritos or your spaghetti or your whatever across the table from another family who understands what it's like. And we have seen, I'm thinking of 2 different scenarios, Keenan. One was kind of a while back. We had 2 families. Both of their children were here waiting for heart transplants. One was a little girl, like maybe 3 years old, and the other one was a kind of a teenage boy. They were both getting heart transplants, waiting for heart transplants. And an example, heart transplants, it always means that one person's tragedy is someone else's miracle, right? So To be clear. And so that brother, and they weren't brother and sister. They were from different towns and whatever, but they became they called each other heart brother and heart sister. And their families got super close because they spoke the same transplant language, and they supported each other through that, waiting for a heart transplant. Another situation that just happened in the last month. I love these boys so much. And we have their permission to share their names. They have been public about this. So 9-year-old boy named Jackson, who was first diagnosed with leukemia when he was 4. He, and mostly his dad, comes with him to Ronald McDonald House because his mom stays back and takes care of the other kids where they live. So Jackson and his dad stayed over and over and over while he beat leukemia when he was from when he was 4 to about 7.
Wow.
And then when the leukemia came back, Jackson and his dad came back. So then they were here fighting cancer, fighting leukemia for a second time. At the same time, another family was here. This guy's name is Ethan, and he's like 16 or 17. He's like, I don't know, 7 years older than Jackson, and he's fighting cancer for a second time. So Ethan and Jackson, one's from Kansas, one's from Missouri, one's a baseball kid, one's a football kid. They are different ages, and yet their families became super close, and Ethan and Jackson became super close. And so Jackson, like recently, I saw him like across the parking lot. I was like, Jackson, I heard some good news about you, bud. And he comes over and he said, Miss Tami, he said, I don't have cancer anymore. And I was like, Jackson, that I heard. And he gave me actually a bracelet that says fearless. And I said, Jackson, I don't know if I can be fearless, but I can certainly fear less. What's so cool is that Ethan, right? Ethan is still fighting cancer for the second time. And like Jackson is now providing all this encouragement to Ethan. So like it's support for the kids, it's support for the families, it's support. Sometimes cancer families are providing support to neonatal ICU families. Like we got to be there for each other. One of the things I appreciate about Ronald McDonald House is it's a place where kind of the barriers come down, the boundaries come down. I told you transparency is kind of my game. I only know how to be one thing, which is me. The thing that happens at Ronald McDonald House is people are just who they are. You know, there's dads who are unshaven and moms with wet hair and people wearing sweatpants. And you could be like some hotshot corporate attorney at the giant whatever association of whatever. And when your child has cancer, you're wearing sweatpants and you're just putting a ball cap on, you know, so people become kind of this most essential of who they are at Ronald McDonald House. And that is, I think, when we're vulnerable with each other is when we can build real relationships with each other. We're not performing for each other at Ronald McDonald House. We're just real. And I think, honestly, back to this epidemic of isolation and loneliness, I think if we can figure out a way to be more real with each other, that'll combat that because we'll realize that everybody's fighting some kind of battle, you know, so let's support each other along the way.
You know, I've recognized a pattern here. I've talked to tens of almost hundreds of CEOs on this show. And
I thought you were going to say I've talked to
5.
I've talked to 10 CEOs.
I've talked to a lot of leaders on this show. And one of the things that I've recognized in the pattern is often the most empathetic, compassionate, and servant leaders are often coming from backgrounds just like yours. So how did you kind of lean into this leadership style of leaning into other people, being able to divulge so much compassion and so much trust into all the team members who you guys have? Servant leadership is a great way to kind of sum this up. How do you lean into that servant leadership style? Because in our last conversation, you talked about you flipped the organizational structure where you're at the bottom of the pyramid to be able to serve everybody else. How'd you gather that amazing knowledge?
I don't know if there's like a single place where I gathered that knowledge, as is the case with much of the knowledge we gather. Like I try to stay open to what other people are teaching me, which is all the time. And you are right in that pretty shortly after coming here, I flipped the organizational chart. So, you know, at the universal organization of whatever, it's like the CEO is going to be at the top, right? And then here comes and then you get kind of down, quote unquote down, and you get middle managers and then people who feel like, and you'll hear people say, I'm the peon at my organization, or I'm this, you know, grunt worker or whatever. So we flipped that at Ronald McDonald House Charities of Kansas City. And my role as CEO, it really does look like this. My job is at the bottom. And it's my job, and it's almost my way of visually demonstrating what I'm trying to achieve in servant leadership, which is it's my job to support the people who report to me. So we have a team of directors, as you might imagine, who reach, with 94 families every night, 5,000 families a year. Our budget is almost 7 million. So we have a larger organization than people might think of when they just hear Ronald McDonald House, right? So with our $7 million budget, we have 57 staff. So it's my job to support the director team. It's the director team's job to support their staff. So they are then below their staff on the org chart. At the very top of our org chart, it says families with sick kids. Families with sick kids, that's who we are here to serve. If I was in a for-profit business environment, at the top, I would probably put like customers. Like our customers are the ones that we're here to serve. I think that that's purpose-driven work. We at Ronald McDonald House are lucky in that it's so easy to point to like this, you know, little kiddo. And literally, as I was walking into this spot to do this podcast with you, I saw a teenager being wheeled in a cart. This teenager has no hair and had crutches. So clearly is fighting some sort of immunotherapy. They've lost their hair and they're being wheeled along in a cart. Like, looked like they were kind of having a fun little cart ride. We're surrounded by purpose all day, every day at Ronald McDonald House. I also think that corporate leaders can be servant leaders no matter what the job is, right? It's putting the needs of your team before the needs of yourself. It's not being in it for the glory. It's not being in it for the perks or the kudos or the whatever. It's being, it's that whole, it's like, it's being willing to do this stuff, and building this culture of being in it together. Something else that I try to do, so I've kind of demonstrated in the org chart, this inverted pyramid. I also, and with 57 staff, I can do this. If we had an organization of 600 staff, I couldn't do this. I'd have to figure out some other way. But what I do with our 50 plus staff is I meet individually with everyone every year. When I sit and have listening sessions with our staff, I'm asking them and I am listening to them. What is it like for you to work here? And it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning related to just being open. Let's listen to each other, whether we're the boss or whether we're the brand new Gen Z employee, like asking your boss, what can I do for you? Like, I think that if we can listen to each other, talk to each other, it creates this kind of openness to make everything better.
Aren't those listening sessions kind of scary, right? Because I know a lot of leaders will struggle with the idea of feedback, right? Hearing feedback is really tough, especially when it means, what can I do better as a leader for you? Or maybe what am I not doing that could help you be a better employee? That's a scary process for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. It really is scary. And one question I always ask, so I've done it for 9 years now. So I've had, done 10 different series. I did it when I first came and then every year since. I always ask, what advice do you have for me? And sometimes people will say, oh, I don't have any, but I have also, as I have built trust with the team and as they have built trust with me, I get advice about things I could do better. Examples are that like for a while there, I think I was like being too silly in staff meetings. They were like, a little less silliness might, but I'm like, okay, that is fair. I appreciate the feedback, because how am I going to know if I don't ask, right? And so one of the tricks, I think, whenever someone offers feedback then is to say, like, thank you for that. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for letting me know what it is like to be you in that scenario. So it is scary. It's also sometimes true, Keenan, that in those moments, people will give advice or like say things that I'm like, okay, we can't do that thing. They say, oh, we should do this thing for everyone. I'm like, well, we can't do that thing. But you know what we did start doing is sabbaticals. We offer sabbaticals to staff at when they've been here for 10 years. And it's not just for full-time staff, it's even for part-time staff. Because when you've worked anywhere for a decade, let's honor that. And so some of our really great organizational ideas have come out of those listening sessions because somebody has the courage to give me their idea. And then I go, hey, I appreciate that idea. Let's see if we can make it happen. So that's some of the ways that we do culture around here.
Yeah, I mean, just being in the space that you guys are, the emotional toll of being around families who are going through such challenging times can weigh incredibly heavy emotionally. So I wonder how you guys are trying to also combat things like compassion fatigue, right? What is the approach on that type of stuff?
Compassion fatigue. Thank you for asking about that. And even like just burnout in general, right? Because we know that for anybody in a helping profession, and I think probably for people in leadership roles, no matter what kind of industry it is, for folks who are not necessarily sitting in that seat, the CEO seat, which I would consider the bottom of the pyramid, there's a degree of burden and responsibility that is sometimes I think hard to contemplate if you haven't actually lived it. And so some of the things that we do to manage our kind of emotions, I guess, our own care and feeding, so to speak, our mental health around here, and that I try to do personally too, is to talk about stuff. Like when we have a critical incident, and it can be any number of things, it is sometimes the loss of a child. If a child and family's been staying with us and their child has passed away, we'll get together and talk about it. Like, let's talk about it. Like, we don't sweep things under the rug around here because I think that we don't find that helpful. In the same way, we have a chaplain who provides support to our families. It's a non-denominational kind of non-religious kind of support, but it's like a humanity kind of support, right? And then so this chaplain, I've actually asked for time with him. Like I think I have time set with him next week because we had a really difficult family situation, a loss that I right now personally, I'm carrying it kind of heavy. I can just feel that I'm kind of clenched around it. And like, I have a faith community. I could talk to the people of mine. I have friends. I have a wife. I mean, I could talk to, but I want to talk to the Ronald McDonald House chaplain because I feel like that person's going to understand the kind of intimacy, the depth of what happens around here, and also how to kind of conceptualize it. There is a certain amount of compartmentalization that I think has to be done to be able to keep going. particularly for those of us in helping roles or people who are in leadership roles, like if you get derailed by all the things, then you're not going to be on the rails for the next thing, So it's always a balance, and that is honestly where I think some of my social work background still comes into play, because being a social worker, like just that kind of those early days of social work training, you're equipped to handle a chaotic environment, right? Here's a bunch of stuff that's going to come at you, and you're going to help whoever's sitting across from you figure out what are the few things that you can fix or make better that are going to have a bigger impact on the whole picture. And so I often feel like I'm doing organizational social work, because I look at what Ronald McDonald House needs, and we need to grow because we don't have enough room for all the families who need us. So there's a real social work component to sort of assessing what's needed, supporting the team, supporting families, supporting, quite frankly, myself, right? Getting what I need so that I can, keep coming back every day. And I love it. I love it every day more than the day before. So I'm a lucky kid.
I mean, we can tell with the energy that you bring to how you talk about these topics. It's pretty infectious, to be honest with you. I want to create an opportunity for us to kind of reflect on the 9-year journey, right? So being the CEO of Ronald McDonald House. If you could go back in time and talk to Tami when she was just starting in this role, knowing some of the challenges that she's faced, some of the moments of doubt, maybe, what advice would you give to Tami if you had 5 minutes with her? What would you say?
I would say that it's interesting to me that you mentioned doubt, because that is a constant companion. People are often surprised to hear that, because I seem, perhaps, maybe you disagree, right? Because I was telling you before we started, I was like, I'm nervous. Does my hair look okay? Because the fact is, I'm not all that confident, right? I am nervous. Self-doubt is a constant companion. And so my 9-year ago self, I think that I would, for one thing, kind of just acknowledge that, like, that's okay. Like you can do things even while doubting yourself. It's kind of like that whole thing, like, brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Brave means that you feel the fear and you do the thing anyway, right? So for me, the self-doubt has just been, I just have learned to bring it along with me and say, there it is. Okay, I see it now. There it is. And I'm going to just do the thing anyway. I also, I struggle a fair amount with, like, just a people-pleasing kind of personality. And so it is true that usually at Ronald McDonald House, I mean, everybody loves what we're doing up in here. I love what we're doing up in here. The staff, I mean, it's really pretty great. There are also sometimes when, like, I have to make a decision that is either A or B. And some people prefer A and some people prefer B. And there is no C, right? And so not everybody may love just whatever decision has been made. And that is always hard for me, because I am generally happiest, as a general rule, when the people around me are happy. Like, it's taken lots of therapy to unwind that. And I'm just like, okay, right. I am generally happiest when the people around me are happy. And it is also, I can't ensure that everyone around me is happy all the time. And so that can also be okay. It's that whole thing, like, I can be okay when others are not. And it is my job to uphold in a professional perspective, this organization, right? And do the right, and that was especially hard was during COVID, because, like, you're either going to have a mask policy or not have a mask policy. You're either going to blah or blah or blah, or, you know what I mean? And, like, no one was happy. And so those were particularly hard days in terms of, like, leading this organization that's a communal living environment. People are living together at Ronald McDonald House during a worldwide pandemic. And kids still got sick, right? Not necessarily from COVID so much, but kids still got cancer and babies were still born prematurely. And so the decision-making fatigue and it's okay if everyone doesn't agree. Do the best you can. Trust yourself, do the best you can, and then kind of bless it and release it. Because I think that I'm trying to get better at that, like doing the best I can, bless it, release it, have integrity throughout the process, and then be okay with it.
I want to double click on that decision fatigue.
I think it's a funny
topic.
Expression. Double click. Click, click.
Let's double click. Let's open up that file right there.
Yeah, I like
decision fatigue is a real thing, right? And I think that one thing we have to recognize is we only have so much mental capacity to make highly valuable decisions. I know that Jeff Bezos at one point in time, there was a piece of content, a keynote or something that he released where he said, what I get paid to do is to make a few incredibly impactful decisions. How do you think about the idea of decision fatigue? Because I've never talked about that on the podcast before. So let's dive into this.
I think it's very real. And I think that, kind of like I mentioned before, just the burden of being in that decision maker role is probably hard
Yeah.
to imagine if one hasn't been in that role. It's kind of like, I think that sometimes young people or young career people will say, oh, I can't wait to be a boss. And then once you're a boss, you realize, oh my gosh, being a boss is actually harder than it looks. Making decisions is harder than it looks. And the decision fatigue thing is real. Because you always know, if you are self-aware enough to know that there's something you don't know, right? If you're self-aware enough to know there's something called the Johari window, and it's like Donald Rumsfeld did a version of this 1,000 years ago of what, but it's like, I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know, right? And I know other people know things that they'll never tell me. So it's like you always have a blind spot. And if you're self-aware enough to know you have it, it still doesn't mean that you know what's in it, right? And so you're going to do the best you can. And it really can be exhausting because you're trying to weigh all the things. And often, now I suspect that Jeff Bezos' decisions are often informed by math, right? Just straight up, 2 + 2 on this end versus 10 + 10 on this end. I'm guessing some of Jeff Bezos' decisions are like that. But the really hard decisions are the ones that are not like math, where it's like culture, or it's if we do X, then we think Y and Z might happen. But if we do X, then also, A, B, and C could happen, which might derail Y and Z. And so like the kind of anticipatory nature of trying to look around all the corners, but not to such a degree that you've probably heard the term analysis paralysis, right? Where it's like you just think and 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 think. And then it's like, well, the opportunity to make a decision passed you by. One of the things that I sometimes will say is to not make a decision is to make a decision, right? To endlessly kick the can down the road is to decide that you have decided to do nothing. And so sometimes it's like, you figure out what you can do the best you can with the information that you have. And it is exhausting. I'll tell you what, something simple. I almost always know what I'm going to wear the day before. Like I knew last night that I was going to wear this today, because that's one less thing. Like when I start in the morning, if I stand in front of my closet and I'm just like, so I generally know what I'm going to wear. And sometimes if it's like a really important meeting, like next week, I know what I'm going to wear for the meeting next week. So I can at least one less thing to have to decide. So I can use my brain power for, more important things than what I wear.
Have you, maybe you picked up on this or maybe not, but you see me in the same outfit all the time. The black t-shirt, which I cycle through in packs of 6. So they come every 2 weeks so I can wear the same stuff, because I don't want to waste decisions on what t-shirt am I going to wear, what shirt am I going to be able to put on to present. It's the small things that make the biggest difference.
I dare say, and I may be wrong, there will be people who make comments and say, I dare say that dudes sometimes have it easier than ladies in that regard. I feel like I
can agree.
I feel like if I showed up in the same, even if I had like a bunch of different shirts, but if they were all the same shirt, somebody at some point would be like, so, you're wearing the same picture in every shirt, or same shirt in every picture. And I'd be like, yeah, I am. You're welcome. My decisions are better as a result. That's what I should say.
There you go. Here's a question for you. It's a little bit different. I was having a conversation with an amazing leader. His name is Dr. Steve Book. He's from one of the nation's largest Christian high schools, right? We were talking about his role as CEO of this large organization. He said something that was really interesting to me. He said, Keenan, I am so happy in how I show up to work every day, because I truly recognize that me as the CEO of this institution does not impact Steve as the person. I am completely separate in the roles, and one and the other do not impact each other, which is a unique perspective that I don't hear from a lot of leaders. Do you have the ability to compartmentalize who Tami Greenberg is compared to the CEO of the Ronald McDonald House?
I don't. I need to apparently get some coaching from Steve. Steve, is that right?
Yeah.
Because I don't. And it is sometimes, I think, part of my secret sauce. Sometimes it's part of the secret, like that wherever I go, I am the CEO of Ronald McDonald House. And by CEO, I'm like, what I always say to people, they say, what do you do? And I always just say, I work at Ronald McDonald House. I always just say I work at Ronald McDonald House, because I'm not into the title thing. I'm really proud of the organization such as it is. And I never miss an opportunity to tell somebody about the great work of Ronald McDonald House. It is also true that it has impacted my, sense of self, like out in the world. Like it's not like I'm some big rager or whatever, but like if I'm ever somewhere being too silly, I'd be like, somebody in this room might know that I represent Ronald McDonald House. Like it's an honor and it's a privilege always. I also am aware that I'm never not representing Ronald McDonald House. And so I'm good with it. It's a trade-off that I enjoy. And because I'm just so proud of it, I'm okay with it. But it's interesting that you mentioned the gentleman that had that other perspective. Sometimes I think about, like, I won't do this job forever. Like, I'm 51, as I've mentioned, I'll be 52 in a minute. Like, who might I be? Who will I be when this chapter of my life is over? And it's not going to be over anytime soon, unless please don't fire me, board of directors. But at some point it will, right? Like, I won't. So it's interesting. It really has impacted my sense of self in a good way. I don't know quite who I am without it. Which is perhaps unhealthy. And my therapist will be like, okay, well, let's talk about that now. I will also say that Ronald McDonald House as an organization, I believe, and I believe it because I think I've seen it over and over, that it makes us better people by virtue of our association with this work.
I was just going to say that.
Really? Okay. I love that. Are you like, I don't know. We have like volunteers who have been volunteers for decades. We've got really great staff retention because something about, I think, like the connectedness to the things that matter most, like reminding us always, we are all always one phone call away from an entirely different life, right? And the families at Ronald McDonald House have gotten that phone call. And sometimes we'll say to our families, like, I can't imagine having this experience. And they'll say, oh, I can't imagine it either. To be clear, I can't imagine it either, but like life has just handed me this set of circumstances. And so now I move forward. So I do think that by virtue of being in this mix, it kind of grows our heart. There's a line in The Grinch, The Grinch, the Dr. Seuss, right? Where it says the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day. And I think that happens at Ronald McDonald House. I think our hearts grow 3 sizes and 3 sizes more and then 3 sizes more because we just kind of make room for all the special that is here. And so I think because of that, I don't turn it off when I walk out the door. I also think I don't want to because I like it. My heart grows every day around here.
And that's beautiful. And that's kind of, what I often think is when we want to separate who we are with the work that we do, often the work that we do is not fulfilling or the opportunity to pour into others and support them in the way in which you guys do. And so naturally, when you were thinking there, I'm like, yeah, it makes a ton of sense that you would want to separate yourself from being the CEO because you represent, from the brand that you represent, so much positivity, so much impact, so much empathy, so much compassion. And why would we try and separate ourselves from that type of work, which in itself is a beautiful statement. So the last question I have for you here is, would you consider yourself an optimist?
I would. Yes, I do consider myself an optimist. And I don't know, I'm going to play with the words. I would consider myself sort of a pragmatic optimist because, again, I'm surrounded by perspective all day, every day at Ronald McDonald House, which is that we're all one phone call away from a different life. So I am pragmatic about that. It is also true that when you see the goodness that people can demonstrate to each other, the generosity that people have of spirit, even in difficult times, like I'm an optimist, I'm a believer in humanity. And I think there's a lot of, I don't think I'm supposed to swear on this thing, right? I've gone this whole time and have not said any bad words. So I would like credit for that. Anybody who knows me well, who's going to be like, wow, she got that through that whole time and used no bad words. But just will say with all the things that are happening in the world, there are plenty of reasons to have fear. And I do have fear. And I consider myself a pragmatic optimist that I think the good of people will win in the end.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when we're in the roles, especially being a leader, optimism is so important. I've actually gotten a little bit of flack in my personal career by being toxically positive. And when I think about that, I think that we have a choice, right? And you said being a pragmatic optimist. I've been trying to put a framework around practical optimism because it gives me the authority and the power to choose in the moment of adversity to look towards the positive side. And that's just how I look at the world. I'm not going to, fall back on anybody else's ideals around that. But I really appreciate that answer. The tradition that we have here to put the wheels down on the podcast is our previous guest wants to ask you a question.
Okay, now, I love it. And by the way, I love that expression, put the wheels down. We're going to put the wheels down.
Put the wheels down,
awesome.
Exactly. Double click, put the wheels down.
You
hang out with.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to adopt all these. And I'll be like, I learned them from my friend Keenan.
There you go. So I'll give you a little bit of context around this question. A previous guest on the podcast was an amazing individual named Matthew Perky. He's the CEO of an organization in Indiana called Josiah Whites, which is an organization which helps and supports youth who have often come through, problems with the law, helping them think bigger, right, and supporting them. One of the things that he has a big mission against is trying to tackle some of the macro problems in society. Kids get in trouble, they end up, going to juvie or, get, any type of societal punishment where they have to go do things. He says, often we are labeling these kids like they'll never be anything greater than the mistakes that they've made. So his question for you was, what issue, population, what historic system makes you most uncomfortable, and how are you going to attack it with the work that you do?
Holy smokes. That is a big question. By the way, my question for the next guest is much easier because you told me to prepare one. So, okay, I need you to ask it again. So I'm a social worker. I can handle it, but I just want to give a thoughtful response. What issue, what system causes me the most angst?
So what system / population or what historic system makes you most uncomfortable, and how would you attack it with the work that you do?
Well, I think I'm going to have to the thing that at this moment is making me most uncomfortable, I'm going to tell you, is the just extraordinary, the unbelievable, the cataclysmic human suffering that is happening in Gaza and in Israel. I mean, that is... Okay, so I'm going to craft today's. I'm going to answer it with one. Okay, well, what's his name? Josiah? No, the organization was called
His name
Josiah.
is Matthew.
Yep. Matthew. Here's what I'm going to do with that, Matthew. Like, that is at this moment, it causes me like actual grief. Like I don't know anybody who lives in Gaza. I don't know anybody who lives in Israel. I just am like, oh my gosh, the humanity, like just the sheer humanity of it is breaking my heart. And I don't know what to do. So that is part of what's hard for me, is I don't know what to do that could help the people who are, we know all the atrocities that are unfolding, right? And that have unfolded, over the last year and whatever. So a way that I try to make, I guess, some sense of, peace with it is that we had on October 7th here at Ronald McDonald House in Kansas City, on October 7th, which was the 1-year anniversary of when Hamas invaded Israel and all of this most recent horrible stuff started happening. That day was a going home day for a family at Ronald McDonald House. A little baby named Silas, who has been with us since the day he was born 265 days ago. It was like January 15th. And his big brother Cannon and his mom Autumn and his grandma Patty, Silas, his esophagus and trachea grew together. So like he had to have a variety of complicated things done. And he's going home. Silas is 9 months old, went home with a trach, the trach thing so he can breathe. And that family had a miracle on October 7th. October 7th was the day they went home. And October 7th was the 1-year anniversary of everything horrible that happened, right? And so for me, in my work, because that was the question Matthew posed for me, and the thing that bothers me the most is what's happening in the Middle East and just the human suffering. This is the human suffering. It's just on a scale that I think is incomprehensible. What can I do in my work to combat that? And I think it's naming it and finding the moments of joy and understanding that the arc of our lives is long, the arc of the moral universe is long. Life is horrible and life is amazing. And individual families will have miracles while another family has a tragedy. It's that whole heart transplant situation again, right? One family's tragedy is another family's miracle. And like kind of growing my heart enough to make room for all of it because it's heavy and it's real. And so and all of those things, tragedy and miracles happen under a Ronald McDonald House roof every day. And so I just at least try to be better at noticing it when it happens, the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Well, Tami Greenberg, thank you.
I don't know what kind of an answer that was, but that's what I got.
You did. I think you did an amazing job. I just want to say for everybody who's tuning in, watching, and listening today, you truly are the definition of heart and hustle. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Seriously.
Thanks for that. This was really fun. Thanks for having me.